Welcome back, everybody, to the Middle-aged Bodcast with me, Raging Rich.
And me, T.A. Shelano.
And T.A, we are back with another guest episode. We're joined today by Sarah.
Hi, Rich. Hi, TA. Thanks for having me on today.
No worries at all.
Thank you for joining us. And I think, Rich, Sarah is going to talk to us today about a different topic that we've not covered before on the podcast, and that's dating in middle age. And so we've got, obviously, Sarah joining us here from a female's perspective. We've got you, Rich, here, obviously from the male perspective. Obviously, I'm sat here and we'll have to be extremely careful, otherwise I'll fall foul of Mrs. Shelano. Let's sort of see where we get to in terms of this. Over to you, Rich, to kick us off.
So, Sarah, for the first question, what are your expectations of dating? Are you doing more of a meeting people in person, or is it sort of starting online? What's kind of your sort of history with dating at the moment?
So a really good question, and one that I haven't really thought about much, to be honest. So I guess just in terms of my history, I've had a mixture of online dating and meeting people in person. Both have their benefits, both have their drawbacks. I suppose getting to kind of like the middle age cycle and dating, let's be honest, it's not a position that you think you're going to find yourself in. You know, you see it in the media, all these happy, loved up couples. You must be married by your 20s, you must be having children in your 30s, etc. So when it comes to actually reaching that magic number of 40, I think all rules are out really, and just kind of go with the flow. I know that probably sounds really cheesy. I suppose one thing I would say is I'm less likely to tolerate bad behaviour, for want of a better word. So I guess in your 20s and your 30s, you might put up with stuff that you wouldn't necessarily want to put up with now. So I don't know, say for guys, you know, like messaging you, it's going really well, and then all of a sudden he just disappears. I wouldn't necessarily chase that anymore. Whereas if I was a bit younger, I might have, you know, given him a bit of a chance, given him time, etc. But I guess it's a case of, if you're not playing ball, I'm not interested.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you made there. And actually, from my side of things, when I've been online and dating, I found a similar sort of thing with people where you do sometimes think, well, what's going on with that? And one of the things that I found quite interesting with the dating side online, and I'm not sure about yourself, Sarah, is people who put stuff online and it's kind of, you can very much quickly tell that it's not legitimate. And certainly when you meet them, you have sort of a slightly different experience of what they're like in messaging. I don't know if maybe when you've sort of been talking to somebody online and then you're actually meeting them in person for the first time, have you sort of had that experience where the person you've been talking to online, you've had this really good connection with, and when you actually meet them, they're very different?
Oh, absolutely. That's happened on a number of occasions throughout my 20s and my 30s, actually. So, a recent dating experience I had, we were getting on really well over message. We'd arranged the date. I got there waiting for him. He turned up, and just not what I expected whatsoever. He looked similar to his profile picture, but in terms of the way we'd been messaging and communicating, he was completely different, completely different. And you just sit there thinking, oh my goodness, I'm here now. I have to kind of suck this up and get on with it. I can't just bail on the person. So on this occasion, you know, I sat there, I had the meal, chatted to him, really wanted to give him a chance, had a couple of glasses of wine, which, let's face it, always helps. But then it just got to the end of the night and I thought, I don't even want to kiss you, you know. So obviously that didn't work out too well. I've also had other instances where I've been getting on really well with guys over messaging, and then you meet them in person and they look nothing like their photo, and that's always really disappointing, because again, you're kind of led to like build up this kind of image of this person in your head, and it's all going great and really well, and then you meet them and that kind of, let's face it, you need that instant attraction and spark with online dating. You see them and your heart just sinks and you think, oh no, I've just spent like a week and a half getting to know this person and I know it's going to go absolutely nowhere at this point.
That's interesting. I mean, I think one of the things we're kind of thinking about with this particular topic and covering it, you know, a lot of the things that we cover on the podcast around the sort of modern era as well, it is exactly this, with the online angle and then the sort of the fake profiles, almost the catfishing type things that you hear about, is, you know, that experience of that kind of thing and how challenging that makes it in an online environment compared with when you obviously, if you've met somebody in real life and I suppose you agreed to go on a date, you have already had that face-to-face interaction. Whereas with this, you're having to trust that what is being presented is something close to reality. And very often, and a lot of people find that it's, as you say, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a good example of that would be my most recent ex. So we met on a well-known dating site, got on amazingly over message, turned up for the date, and he was one of these that looked completely different to his profile picture. And again, my heart sank, but I thought, no, you've traveled all this way, let's go for it. And to be fair, by the end of the night, we got on so well, and we both said at the time, let's give it a go. And to be fair, we had a 14-month relationship out of it. So I guess there is something about not judging a book by its cover, possibly, but then on the counter to that, you have got to know them as well. But I guess there's also something in there a little bit about maybe, I don't know if deceit's the right word, but you have kind of been lied to a little bit almost. I mean, I decided to give this guy a chance, and for most of it we had a good relationship. But if I'd have seen that guy out on the street the way he currently looked, then no, I probably wouldn't have given it a chance. But yeah, it's that kind of striking the balance, I suppose. Do you give somebody a chance? Do you not? There might be reasons why they have old photos on there. I guess at the end of the day, it's about having that chat with the person in the moment and just kind of going from there. But I think you get an early vibe soon on as to whether it's going to go anywhere or not. So I suppose trusting your gut is the key takeaway.
So on that point then, with that particular example that you've given, had he used a more up-to-date photograph then, do you think you would have still gone on that date or not?
So I'll admit that's a difficult one for me to answer. Due to his job, I was very interested in meeting him. Not sure how much I can say on the podcast, but he works in motorsport and I'm quite a big motorsport fan. So I must admit I was very intrigued to meet him and kind of learn a bit more. So, that probably sounds very shallow and selfish. I suppose the question is, if he hadn't worked in motorsport, would I have met him and I'd have seen his picture at the time? I genuinely don't know, to be honest.
I think because that brings me to sort of an interesting angle to this as well around all of this, and I'd be interested on Rich's view here, is that expectation then, especially in sort of Western society now, in this sort of online Instagram sort of world, whether people feel almost then forced to portray something that might enable somebody to give them a chance rather than present a reality where they think they won't be given a chance. So although it's a form of deceit, is the way society is behaving, driving people to think they need to be deceitful to almost get a chance? I'm interested in either of your views on that.
I think yes and no. I guess it depends on the self-confidence of the person as well. So this individual, when I met him, he had an amazing job, an amazing career, and so many amazing stories, but clearly didn't have the confidence to put up recent pictures. He struggled with his weight, which obviously that kind of links in with the podcast theme and the wanting to do all the weight loss and all of that thing, but just kind of felt quite sad looking back that somebody felt they couldn't present the true version of themselves to get that date, if that makes sense.
I think it's quite interesting because I've obviously gone on dates with girls who have put pictures up where maybe they were a little bit younger. It's not normally happened for the most part. In recent times, it's not been so much like that, but certainly when I first was going onto the online platforms, there were a lot of women who were putting pictures where they were maybe a couple of years younger and maybe a little happier with their appearance and stuff like that. I think it's an odd one. I mean, I've put pictures up sometimes where I've probably been a bit younger, but still kind of look the same. It's more just maybe I'm dressed a little bit smarter or something like that. But then you made a good point, Sarah, with sort of showing your true self and things like that. I mean, if I was putting pictures of me as my true self up on dating sites with all my superhero T-shirts and memorabilia, I don't know how many dates I'd be getting at all. But
there is a market though. There are women that do like superhero films and all those kind of things. So I don't think, maybe actually in some respects the more authentic approach in some respects might then actually give you a greater chance of finding somebody who's more suitable than presenting something that is not you, I suppose, and then they meet you and they go, oh, well, I don't really like that, and that's not one of my interests. I don't know. So maybe you should be there in your full Superman glory or whatever.
I think it's very bizarre because obviously you see social media, print media, everyone's all dressed up looking to the nines, oh, this is my perfect partner, etc. But I think most people just want to see the real authentic person, have that person you can just chill out with on a Sunday afternoon in your PJs. It's not all about going to the parties and out for the fancy dinners and on the first class holidays to Miami, etc. I think society does play a massive role in this, in maybe making people feel that they aren't good enough in themselves, and that's maybe why they do portray themselves as this different person to kind of lure people in almost.
Society definitely drives this sort of view, doesn't it, around beauty and all of that sort of stuff. So you're kind of leading into that where people maybe do feel more self-conscious perhaps than they would have done in generations gone by as well around that kind of stuff. Rich?
Well, I just wanted to say, because you mentioned, TA, the Instagram generation and that kind of stuff, and Sarah, I don't know what it's like from a female perspective, but certainly when I've gone on dating sites and I see women on there, if I see they've got any kind of filter on there, it's instantly, I'm not interested. Any sort of animal faces over their face, like cat ears and stuff. I don't know if that's something that you find that men do as well, but have you sort of experienced any of that kind of thing where people are actually not so much hiding their appearance completely, but they're putting stuff on their pictures that they're probably trying to show a playful side, but actually it's a little bit off-putting?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say so much of the animal faces. I think that was a phase a few years ago, wasn't it, where they had like all the ears and the noses and all of that. When I have seen that, I just think, how old are you? Do you know what I mean? I'm looking for a man, not a boy. I think when you see pictures of men, a lot of it's around the gym of all places, trying to show off their muscles and that they work out. Or another funny one is a picture of a guy in the car with his seatbelt across. I don't know why guys think it's a good thing to take pictures of themselves in cars, maybe stood by the car so I can see what type of car it is. But I get the impression it's probably harder for men to kind of see through the filters and everything. And plus, as well, a lot of girls and women do hide behind makeup, whereas I don't think men, well, I don't know what the right word is, but men don't really wear makeup. Some do. To be fair, they might put a bit of concealer on or a bit of mascara, but with a woman, she can completely transform the way she looks through makeup. And I don't think that's very fair when it comes to the dating pool.
That's a good. I mean, I suppose in terms of you going back to the image thing of that as to what somebody really looks like, and I think the interesting thing going back to the Instagram and the social media generation has been the influence, particularly on women, but increasingly men as well, is to sort of start going down this sort of plastic surgery type route as well, or the Botox and all of these things. So it's the way that's driving some of those behaviours as well in a way that it didn't, say, 20 years ago. What's your view when you see kind of women doing that now or sort of following those trends?
I guess from a female perspective, I just think what a waste of money. Embrace your natural beauty. I understand some people aren't happy with themselves, but don't go sticking filler in your face or getting your butt lifted. Eat healthily, go to the gym or work out however you prefer working out. Cut down on your alcohol. Something my friends and I say a lot is eat less, move more. Try the natural, more organic ways first before you start spending thousands of pounds on enhancements that could potentially go wrong and kill you. I think you may be familiar with the recent storyline in Coronation Street where one of the characters went to Turkey to work. She didn't go for the treatment, got talked into it, and she's now ended up with a stoma bag for the rest of her life. Some of these procedures, they all say, oh, they're straightforward, but actually the risks are huge.
Well, it's interesting as well that people will take, I suppose, that degree of risk of going to another country where perhaps the rules and regulations, are maybe not been as enforced as strongly as they are as maybe in the UK around medical treatment as well, and putting your life almost then in someone's hands in the pursuit of seemingly wanting to look better is and I think there's been a case in real life recently where the lady went and she died. I think actually had travelled from here. I think it might have been Turkey again, actually, and sadly died. So there's real risks of where this sort of drives some of the behaviours, I guess.
So, Sarah, you've mentioned about the online dating. I have a little bit of an example here, but just wanted to get your sort of thoughts on fake profiles and catfishing. This is not that someone tried to catfish me, but many years ago, when I was looking on one of the sites, there was a profile. Didn't interact with them at all. It had a name. It had some pictures. The pictures were very blatantly not of the person because the pictures were of Mila Kunis, the actress. Have you seen sort of any profiles where people you instantly know it's not them and it's, you know, they're trying to use pictures of somebody else that's maybe well known, or is there sort of things where you've had people sending messages and you very quickly realize it's not actually the person that you're talking to, not so much in sort of when you've met them, but just from sort of seeing the profiles? I know certainly in my experience, you'll tend to get people who will literally message you with a hi, and that's it. And then if you respond, you get a oh, and they'll kind of try and draw information out of you and stuff that isn't, you can kind of tell very quickly is not a legitimate dating interest. Have you had any of that kind of experience?
Not really. I suppose the experiences I've had are twofold. So, one, you get the guy that will start messaging and start being inappropriate straight away. So, straight away, block, delete, gone. I suppose the other thing I have experienced, which can be a bit confusing, is a lot of guys will put photos up with about 5 or 10 friends, and they'll have multiple photos with 5 or 10 friends, and you're kind of there thinking, well, who am I actually speaking to? And not to sound harsh, but it's always I don't know, the less attractive out of the group that is the person that's trying to speak to you. So it's almost like he's kind of using his friends to draw you in.
But that's a bit risky, isn't it, as a strategy? Because if you then go, oh, okay, I agreed to go on this date with, based on, you got this picture of 8 people or something, and you go, oh, there's 1 or 2 there I really don't like the look of, and it's one of them you meet. Surely the risk is then that you meet the friends and go, well, actually, these were the ones I was really looking at in the photos. I don't know. That feels like more of a dangerous idea in some respects. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so, because again, you get that false sense of not security, but that whole, oh, I'm meeting this person, they look like that, this is who I've been having these conversations with, and then a completely different person turns up. It's very confusing, but also a bit scary, like you say. You think you're meeting one person when actually the complete opposite turns up. And then it's, how do you deal with that situation in the moment? Am I safe? Do I roll with this? What do I actually do?
Quite an interesting observation. And again, it's an element of going back to what you were talking about before with old photos and things like that. It's an element of deceit again, isn't it? Because you're not then presenting a clear version of a truth there. You're making it ambiguous. So you're almost trying to entice somebody in, almost like it's some sort of lottery prize where you're going, it's one of us. And you're thinking, oh, it could be one of the 2 I think look really great. It is a bit like, so again, it's that form of almost like a weird kind of marketing approach rather than, like you say, a genuine attempt to connect with somebody truthfully. Yeah, that's quite interesting. What would you do to improve dating, especially for perhaps those who are not in the first fit of youth, shall we say?
Oh, that's a really hard question, to be honest. I'd like to think the older we get, the more we know what we're looking for. I mean, yes, we're all going to have a bit more baggage, but I just think, is there any way of people just being more truthful, more honest? Is there a better way of verifying photos online? I mean, we haven't even spoken about in person. There's been multiple times where I've been out with friends and you're at the bar and you try and have a conversation with somebody and people just aren't interested. They're either too absorbed in their phones or, let's face it, after COVID, people just don't know how to have a conversation in real life anymore with somebody they've met in a bar or a coffee shop. So It kind of feels like we're missing a trick here. Back in the 50s and, way, way beyond, people would just talk to each other and it would happen naturally.
Yeah, well, I guess as well, and outside of, again, we have covered this probably in season one at points around Western society at times and the impact that has on people's sort of mental health, well-being, things like that as well. But I suppose it's a good example there, isn't it? Where it's the environment that people are now in versus you could be, in another country where what we're seeing here at the moment is less prominent, and people would still be more able to go and talk to people, more of a community cohesion, that kind of thing. And actually, it's very transient now. You kind of go through cities and towns or whatever, and it's a very much of people don't know anybody, and people just walk past each other on the street. Whereas again, decades gone by, people knew more people in the community, or people knew who people were. That's also part of that. And then people now, it almost seems like some of the horror stories we hear in the media are things that happen, that people are now very guarded, I suppose, especially for women when they're out and about being spoken to by men or what somebody's intentions may be, and can sometimes obviously be bad. There's an awful lot at the moment around violence against women and stuff. And even that apprehension now maybe more than there would have been decades ago or even 20 years ago, maybe. I mean, do you have a view on if you got approached publicly now versus when you were younger, would you be more apprehensive?
I think I'd actually be more open to speaking to somebody now. I think when you're younger, you may be a bit more nervous, possibly, but you go through life, you live your different experiences, you come into contact with different people, even through the world of work. You come into contact with so many different people and you learn to interact on so many different levels. I personally feel I'd have more confidence and I'd be more amenable to starting a conversation face to face. I think one thing I would say, though, through our conversation, TA, is that it's clearly apparent that both men and women feel the same about the online world. We're all experiencing similar problems, yet nobody wants to talk in real life. So it's kind of like, well, how do we make this easier to meet people?
It's interesting. Somebody I used to work with actually started doing, when she was single, she actually went speed dating and said that was a great experience. And I've never done that myself, but you've at least then got that kind of experience of meeting people as well. So you're kind of getting, okay, this first person you've spoken to might not be for you, but then the next person might be. And you've kind of got that way of having a quick burst of, right, I can have a conversation with this person. I can find out if there's anything we've got in common or any sort of interest that we might be able to make a common thing across the board. It might be one of them likes a band you've not heard of and you kind of like, oh, tell me about that, or that kind of thing. We don't do that kind of stuff. Like you say, there's none of that interaction in person now. It's all very much the online processes. Sarah, you mentioned about photo, sort of making sure to confirm it's that person, and I know I've seen the one where you sort of hold your phone and you have to turn your head another way and all that kind of stuff. But I do find they're really poor ways of verification. And even now, when they first did it, it probably did work quite well, but people always find a way around it in a way to sort of trick the software and stuff like that. And it's not just sort of those fake profiles either. I always find there's a lot of dormant profiles, and personally for me, I don't know if you find this as well, but when you're on and off the dating sites, you tend to find there's a lot of people that are still on there after an amount of time, so they're obviously having that similar experience to you. Well, they're obviously not meeting people either, but you don't really have any interaction with them. And I've found that, certainly. I don't know if you sort of noticed anything like that, where you might try and sort of get into contact with someone and you think, oh, actually, it looks like we've got stuff in common. And then months later, you actually find they're still on there and that there's never actually been any interaction between you and them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there might be something in there that some people are just wanting to say, have a dabble. They're not on there to intentionally meet somebody. They just want to have a look, see what's out there. A recent story of a friend of mine, his friend's, I think it was daughter, her boyfriend, it turned out, was on Tinder, just having a look, having a browse, even though he'd been in a relationship with this girl for 2 or 3 years. I mean, good for her, she binned him off, but it does make you think, what are people actually doing on these sites? I know for me, when I've either met somebody or when I can't be bothered with them, I will delete the profile and delete the app. I think you've got to be careful with how you go about that though, because with different apps, you've got to go through certain layers to actually delete the account rather than just deactivating it. So a recent example of that was after my recent relationship and I went back on the dating site, my old profile was still there, even though I thought I'd gone through and fully deleted it, it was still there. So I was one of these, I guess, dormant people that had been sat there for months and months. And that worried me quite a bit because I thought I'd gone through all the correct steps to get rid of that. But I guess if you don't know how to delete it properly, there is that risk that your online footprint is going to be there for a while.
On that particular point, then with the dormant profile, do you not, if somebody contacts that profile while you've got it as dormant, I take it you don't then get any messages. So you didn't log back into that site, find the dormant profile, and there's messages there or anything like that. There's just nothing there.
That was the really weird thing. So I must not have had my notifications on, but there was no there was likes, but there was no messages. But I never had anything on my phone popping up to say such and such has liked you or such and such has sent you a message. Because I remember we both stood there, we both deleted the app at the same time. And with Apple, you normally get a little thing popping up saying, and it will delete all the data in it. So to me, that would imply that you're deleting my profile, my contact number, etc. But clearly that didn't happen. And that's actually quite misleading. You think you've done the right thing, got rid of your online footprint, but actually, no, you need to go in and do it another way before deleting the app. And that's scary as well, because you don't want to have stuff online that you don't want. If you've met somebody, then it's goodbye dating app. I don't want my profile still hanging around.
I think that's interesting, and it goes back to the thing you were talking about with the guy who was in a relationship and he was obviously on the dating app. There was obviously very famously the site that was created aimed at people who were married to obviously effectively cheat on their partners and all the rest of it. And then there was a data breach or whatever it was around all of that, and people's details been released. And I think in that case, there were people who thought potentially they didn't have their data available anymore. And then it becomes, exposed. So it is an interesting point on whether this deactivation versus dormant versus what's there is, I suppose, quite an interesting dynamic again about the online era, really, isn't it? About what information there is out there. And again, like when you're actively looking on a site, as which you two have spoke about, how many accounts then on there? Is there actually somebody there as such? They're just an account that somebody had and they're not using anymore. So you're trying to find something where there's a large percentage of the accounts are not even active. So it makes it even more difficult and challenging, I suppose.
I think there's also something to be said about paid accounts and free accounts. So you're more likely to get the chaff, say, in the free accounts, because it's so easy to go on, set up a profile, have a bit of a look, see what's out there, and then forget about it. Whereas if you're actively paying a subscription, you're going to put more effort into looking for someone, but also if you want to come off it, you're going to do absolutely everything to make sure that subscription isn't coming out of your account anymore. So I think there's something there as well. And that probably links into the whole you'd like to think it may lead into the whole less catfishing if you're paying for a site. But then I guess there are people out there that they just don't care and will pay to get their kicks.
I mean, on that point, the ones where you've had sites that have been much more around trying to match people on likes, interests, personality, etc., and that kind of more targeted focus. I mean, what's your views on in terms of paying for something that looks like it's more likely to find you more of what you're looking for?
That's a really good question. I've had this conversation with a number of friends, and I feel the older I'm getting, the more I would prefer to go on a paid site, because I'd like to think somebody's only paying for something that they're willing to invest in. It's so easy to just, like I say, set up the free site and go from there. But then that said, I got friends that have met their husbands and wives on free sites. So yeah, it is a minefield, as you're probably realising, TA.
Yeah, so I do think it's an interesting thing, and it's interesting listening to the two of you from obviously from a different perspective of somebody who's not doing that, I suppose, or not having that experience. I get to watch a lot of things of what's either obviously I talk to you, Richard, or talk to other people or see things that are happening kind of world and stuff. And it is interesting as to what the answer actually is, because it seems that what we're actually leading to is more opportunities, it seems, supposedly to meet people, but actually it's not really working out. And actually people are more unhappy and more isolated and not getting closer to what they're really looking for.
Well, the paid services, I have subscribed to some services in the past and I've met people through them. One of the things I will say, however, from sort of looking on there, there's always these kind of alternative versions. So, for example, take something like a match.com. You'll put your pictures on, you'll put a bit about yourself, you'll put your likes. It's a very generalized version of your likes that you can tick. And it then kind of compares that and it'll say, oh, you have these many things in common. It might be travel, it might be music, but it's literally music. It's not the artist you like or anything like that. Then there are other ones where there are a little bit more of an in-depth thing where it will ask you your personal tastes about things, and it'll say, so it might ask you a question about a theoretical situation it comes up with and you answer it a certain way, and then the person that you're sort of matched with has written something that's a similar sort of style on different sites. But I think even like Match a few years ago, I think they tried to do the eHarmony style of dating as well, where it was that more specified stuff, but you then had to pay another subscription on top of your main subscription to do it. So there's obviously a lot of lucrative things to it. They obviously do things where if you pay for 1 month, you're actually paying more for that 1 month than you would if you paid. Yes, you're paying bulk, so you're still paying a bigger fee total, but you might buy a 6-month subscription, you're paying less total than if you paid 6 1-month subscriptions individually each month, if you know what I mean.
So it's like, again, it's like business things as well, where you're attracting people in, and obviously there's opportunities there from a commerce point of view for people to make money out of it. But I think the point is the satisfaction then from a customer point of view, because you're ultimately playing with people's feelings and emotions much more than a normal sales marketing product type environment. You hear people like looking to find somebody potentially to settle down with. That expectation then of paying for a subscription for that versus paying for your TV subscription or your broadband it's a very different. It can be a very much more disappointing outcome, I guess, in the end. Just average. I mean, again, from either of your perspectives here, in terms of the getting older side of it as well. I mean, like, how do you then, I think you mentioned earlier, Sarah, about sort of baggage and things like that, whatnot, but how do you feel about then dating somebody who's been married before, maybe has children or caring responsibilities, all of those things, in terms of then your own aspirations, etc.?
Yeah, so that's a really tough one because I've always prided myself on working hard, getting a good job, and building a life for myself. What worries me is entering a relationship with somebody that has already had the marriage or they've already got the children, and a lot of their time and priority will rightly so be on their children, or worst case scenario, the horrible ex-wife that's trying to bleed them dry, for example. But equally, I know I'm at an age now where I can't afford to be as picky maybe as I was, but then equally I know I'm 39, I'm single, I've got my own place, I've got a good job, I don't have debt, I don't have children, and I haven't been married. There will be other people in my age bracket like that as well. So just keep the faith, guys, keep the faith.
So on that point, you'd prefer, in that sense, to ideally meet somebody within, I guess, your age range then, who hasn't got maybe some of those things that would then carry on over into a relationship with you that you then have to manage. You'd rather not have that kind of scenario. You almost feel like it's a fresher slate as such.
I mean, in an ideal world, yes. And if you asked me that question 10, 15 years ago, I would have said, absolutely, I'm not interested in somebody that has that level of baggage, for want of a better word. But, I am reaching a point now where I do have to be a bit more adaptable and a bit more accepting. I suppose the individual, it would be the way that they deal with their children or their ex-wife. So I guess a recent example for me was the guy I mentioned, who I recently had the relationship. Whilst he didn't have children and he hadn't been married before, all he did was talk about his ex-girlfriend and kept saying how they were good friends, etc. And I'll be honest, that really grated on me. But now that I'm not in that situation anymore and I look back and I reflect, it was the way he spoke about her that really didn't, that really unsettled me. If we'd have had those conversations around why does it make you feel uncomfortable, And if I'd have been able to express my concerns, then maybe could have been a different story. But I think what I've got to remember is now we are a little bit older, and people should hopefully be a bit more mature about things like the children and the exes, and things like, how the ex behaves with the guy when he enters a new relationship. Let's be honest, we hear these horror stories where exes just cause so much trouble. And I think that's what kind of scares me. I don't want the drama. Like I say, I've worked hard to get myself to where I am, and I don't want to have to take on other people's drama.
I mean, again, do you feel that with that, though, it's almost like you don't really want to hear about him talking about her, because then that becomes much more of a, well, it sounds like you much rather be back with her than actually invest in you, for example. Was that part of that?
You've hit the nail on the head there, TA. So in fairness to him, he told me from the beginning that they were friends. And I've never dated anybody who's been friends with an ex before. So I was quite prepared to give it a go. Like I say, getting a little bit older, need to give different things a chance. But every time I saw him, he would always refer to his ex. And as you can imagine, as time went on, that just became more grating. And then when I did challenge him about it, he basically turned around and said, I told you from the beginning that we were friends, and it's end of chat, basically. But like I say, looking back, that was more about his personality and the way he deals with things rather than me. All I was doing was expressing a concern and trying to have a conversation and being shut down. But I think, as we know in life, when people start to shut others down, there's clearly something more deep rooted there.
We've sort of focused a lot on some of the negative sides of things here as well in this conversation, but there have been good things to come from dating experiences as well. Do you have any sort of good positive stories and some maybe humorous stories about things on dates that you can share? I do have my worst first date ever to tell, and I will tell it. It is quite funny. But have you got any sort of stories where you've maybe gone on a date with someone, even if it was just one date and you didn't see them again, but it was a really positive experience or anything like that?
Yeah, don't get me wrong, there's been some really nice dates. I always kind of see it as an opportunity to try out a new bar or try out a new restaurant. Uh, the ex that we were just speaking about, as I said previously, I was disappointed to begin with, but then when I got to know him on that evening, that was a really pleasant surprise that I'd gone in with that initial judgment, having seen him, to it actually leading on to a longer relationship. So that was a positive experience, of course. I think one of my funny dating stories was going to meet a guy. We hadn't spoken on the phone, but been messaging. And when he spoke, he sounded exactly like a Dalek from Doctor Who. Trying to keep a straight face throughout that date was very challenging, shall we say. But I came away from it just kind of laughing to myself, thinking, what on earth is going on? But no, that one does always make me chuckle.
Rich, I think we now want to hear your funny story. I mean, I was laughing, I think, already before. I think I know what might be coming here, but
I've got to say this in a way that doesn't just make it sound terrible. So this is one of my first ever online dates, and I've been talking to a girl online for a little while. I kind of got the impression that she'd been talking to some other guys as well. And this one day, randomly, I can't remember if it was the day of or the day before, she'd suddenly gone, oh, are you free? So I get on the train, I go to meet this girl. I remember I must have had a drink on the train. I thought, I need the loo before I meet her. So I just quickly ran into a pub to use the loo. One thing I will point out, I can't go and use the loo somewhere if I haven't bought a drink or something in there. So I had to go and buy a glass of Coke, down that, and then go to the loo. So that doesn't help. But then I go and meet this girl. Again, yeah, she was nice enough. She didn't look completely like her pictures, but not completely different either. But as time's going on, we're having a few more drinks. Realised there's probably not that much in common. I probably, because I'd had a couple, foolishly did point out that we probably weren't going to have any romantic involvement between us. Probably shouldn't have said that, but hey. And her response to me was, well, you're a bit too camp for me anyway. And I went, what do you mean? And she went, well, you keep waving your hands about. And now, you mentioned Doctor Who there, Sarah. If you've seen Matt Smith in Doctor Who when he's doing the 50th episode and he's waving his hands about, that's kind of what I picture me being. A bit like him waving his hands about, right? So she says this to me and I'm like, okay. She goes back in the pub. She comes out with 2 drinks. She puts them down and she says, oh, the barman's just tried chatting me up. Oh, okay. Let's just say the barman would have been more likely to chat me up than her. I think I might have offended her a little bit when I said there was no chance of, and I didn't mean it at all. I didn't mean it at all, and it was such a shame. But I will say there was a great statue of Tintin in the pub there. That's the one thing I take away from it. That's a terrible story. I think I'm going to edit all of this out. That's terrible.
I don't know. You told it so beautifully, honestly, of like downing the Coke to use the toilets, and it's like as an anecdote, it kind of went a little bit all over the place.
Oh, come on!
I've got to ask you, the two of you, this. There's obviously a lot of now these shows. It all started quite innocently enough with Cilla Black and Blind Date back in the day, but you know, as you both be aware, it's become more and more extreme versions of this, with whether it's marrying somebody or these different dating things, up to and including, obviously, one of the more famous ones, everyone gets naked on it. Would either of you ever consider doing any of the extreme shows, up to and including like the ones around getting married and all that?
It's a no from me.
The only one, and I wouldn't do it, but the only one I think has some form of validity to it, shall we say, is Love is Blind. And the only reason I say that is because if you actually read up on it, there are people that have gone on it and got married who have successful marriages that aren't actually televised on it. So they're there in the background. They aren't part of the main storyline. So I only ever watched the first series in full. But when you watch it, there's about 10 men and 10 women that are on it. And they only focus on about 3 or 4 men and women on it. So I will say with that, there's probably a bit of validity to the end product. Obviously not for the ones where they try and get the shock value from the TV side of it, but they don't film all of it because there are certain couples that they obviously go, oh, the process is great and has worked for them, but they're not TV entertaining. But anything else, no. Go for it.
And are you going to do an edit where you try and do that story about Lester Better? Or not?
Oh, for God's sake. Hang on now.
It wasn't that bad.
Okay, it's editable.
Thank you, Sarah. Right, I'm not having these.
Well, you're the editor, so you can make your decisions when you come to it. But okay.
No, so thank you very much, Sarah, for coming on to the podcast today and chatting with us about dating.
Yeah, it's been an interesting topic to cover. We're obviously grateful for you for joining us for that. And we do have what now appears to, Rich, have become, again, a bit of a ritual for us with guests on the podcast, which is we let the guest close out the episode with their final thoughts and reflections.
Yeah, so final thoughts. Obviously, we've gone quite in depth in this podcast, but it's honestly not really, I mean, yeah, it can be bad, but you've got to take the positives with it. So the way I see it is whenever you're starting up dating again, just go in with that happy, positive mindset. Be yourself. Be the first person to initiate the conversation. You don't have to wait for somebody to send you a like or a message. If you like the look of that photo and profile, just go for it and see what happens. But equally, don't turn a blind eye to meeting somebody in person either. There's so many different avenues and opportunities out there. So yeah, just be positive. It will happen.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.